with that, I'm happy to kick it off. So I just want to welcome everybody to the Agilicus webinar for this week. We have an awesome guest, one of the best guys that I like to work with, that's for sure. It's Tig Kirkwood from City of Kenosha. Welcome.
Well, thank you, John. I have to correct you. My name is Tig.
Tig Kirk. Sorry. You know what? I was just looking at something and I had it in my head. And I knew it because when we first met, I literally just thought about this 5 minutes ago. And I'm like, when we first met, I called him the wrong name. And it was in the back of my mind, Tig, I am sorry. But if we're going to open that way, we're going to open that way. So here we are. It's the last Thursday of the week. So today is an excellent topic. We're diving into, really the city's transition to a VPN environment for the most part. Our solution was put in place from a zero trust perspective, but I wanted to start, when we dive into this at first, I want to start a little bit before that to understand, a lot of your methodologies, because I think those are very important. And I've learned a lot from working with you in the last year or so. And so I think it's very important to share that with the group as well.
Sure. Where would you want me to start?
Well, I wouldn't mind prepping the group a little bit first. So one of the slides that I threw in here, slightly adjacent to the topic, it's not so much focused on Kenosha, but a lot of the conversations I've had recently, and I want to get your opinion on this, they've been around three main categories, and when it comes to municipalities at least. And the first one is a misconception around, we're too small, nobody's looking for us, we're not being targeted. The second being, cybersecurity is solely the responsibility and problem of the IT department. It's not about the employees and their responsibility to do certain things. And then the third one is, it's an optional spend. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on those three buckets.
Sure. Well, first of all, we can hit on the fact that our municipalities frequently targeted by cyber criminals. Sadly, I work in an environment where we had an unfortunate incident that brought us to the world's attention, where we were in an incident that they would consider civil unrest in our city. Our city is about 100,000 people. We span about 30 square miles. And when that happened, because of it being broadcast with social media across the world, our network immediately became a target. We had over 1 million emails every half hour coming into our mail server with death threats to support to anything that you could imagine. I was getting from all over the world attempts to break into our network. We were looking at 1 million attempts every 20 minutes. On top of that, our website was being attacked from all over the world, and fortunately, only brought us to our knees for about 15 minutes. So during that time, even though we are an open source philosophy government, that we embrace open source first, two reasons. One, it's very secure, and two, it's fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. And we have grown that way, and so open source is the first thing that we attempt to solve issues and challenges with, and then Microsoft is the go-to for the proprietary things that we must do for that. Fortunately, during that, it went over practically 6 weeks of things happening in our city that took us worldwide. We never had a break-in, and that was kind of proving our strategy of some things that happened. Knock on wood, I don't like to talk about it in public because it also draws attention to us, but at the same time, it draws the things that municipalities are a target, and especially become a target when there is something that one special group might not agree with compared to another special group, and then now in the modern day and age, that is rioting as part of actually trying to break into a network. It isn't just happening in your streets. So that municipalities are definitely a target of cyber criminals.
And I want to dig into that a little bit more in a couple slides, because I think that's important, and your role in this is very important. And maybe I'll circle back to that second question of IT in a few slides. But what about the optional expense? So, as we wait for a few more people I see are trickling in, I know the thing that came to my mind this morning, actually, when I was thinking about the conversation with you. So back in a past life, I was involved in some smart city projects, right? That's really where I started to work with municipalities quite a bit. And thinking back to that time, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, smart cities were the big thing. They were in all the news topics, Google doing this, Amazon doing that. But nobody talked about security at that point in time. It was about IoT devices and open data and all this stuff. But security was almost an afterthought. How do you reconcile that?
I think that's true, but you got to remember that is basically a marketing ploy or a sales program is what you're seeing out in the public, in the eye, in the marketplace, all of those things that happen. But no matter what, security is, one of the things that you want to have up in front all the time is, thinking about how can I keep my network secure, at the same time freeing money that allows me to do other things that I need to do to grow and expand as a city. But we have to do that. And on top of that, our insurance companies and other companies that support us have changed their focus also. We are now required we have an organization called CIVMIC here, which is Civic Mutual Insurance Companies that take care of the Midwest, Wisconsin it started in. They now require us to have certain criteria to keep our network secure, training our users to keep things secure, making people mindful of what a spam or a malware or a ransomware type email or website is, teaching your users how to pay attention to those type of things, or they raise your insurance or they will not insure you for a break-in. So if you weren't already thinking about that as a municipality, your insurance companies are going to force you to think of that because they won't insure you unless you meet this type of criteria. Fortunately for us, we were thinking that way. We don't have a lot of money here in the city of Kenosha, so we're very conscious of what we spend and how we spend it for our taxpayers. And so it just kind of went hand in hand as things grow and change, that no matter what, security's got to be there in the top three, if you will.
And that's all kind of an excellent almost introduction into the topics that we're going to be talking about today. And maybe we'll take a quick step back now that everybody has jumped in the room here. And Tig, if you don't mind, a couple lines about yourself, why you went into this field to begin with, what your role is at the municipality, and introduce yourself to the group.
Well, thank you, John. My name is Ty Kirkman. I am the IT director here for the City of Kenosha. We are a southeastern city between Chicago and Milwaukee on Lake Michigan. We have about 100,000 people in our town or city, if you want to call it. We have anywhere between 890 to 1,200 active employees, depending on the season. Obviously, during the summer, we employ a lot more with swimming pools, grass cutting, parks, all those types of things. So for that, we have a small IT department. Everything we do is pretty much homegrown or open source supported first, like we talked about earlier. And then we do have the Microsoft domain where we have things that are proprietary necessary. We've recently went down the Google road, and we are migrating to Google Workspace for government, finding that very successful. My employees are or I should say the employees of the city are loving it. Our new hires, what we call our young talent, are just, naturally sitting down at a desk and can just take off working because it's a little nickname that I call it is Google-fied. They're Google-fied. They can sit down and just take off with that. So we're a progressive city in the sense of how we approach things, but at the same time, we're unique in the sense we don't spend a lot of money and we have a small IT staff to support all of the things that we do.
And I mean, it's funny you put it that way, because I'm almost picturing when you put an iPad in front of a child and somehow they can just work it and they're flying around it. It's almost the same thing.
It's true. And I'm an old guy. I've been doing this for 34 years. I came to the city right from college. They recruited me. I was teaching at the technical college at the time, graduating college there. So I kind of grew up here. My career is here. I remember when we set up our first dial-up network, if you will, for the internet. For us, it was, out of Milwaukee that we would be dialing into. It was called Exec PC, and I had bond two 56K modems together, so we were had big bandwidth, and we were excited, and seeing where we are today of having a full gig fiber symmetrical circuit, out of our building to support, our users. And people, even then, it's like, you think that bandwidth's big enough? I'm like, yeah, I think it'll do just fine. But
and who would have thought you would have ended up there, right? When you did that first project?
Never. I never dreamed of having fiber into my building, going out to the internet and streaming something like this live. I mean, that wasn't something that was in the forefront of my mind, but obviously over the last 6 years, it certainly became that way. And Kenosha is unique also because we're becoming a fiber city through a joint adventure through what they call a dark fiber developer. And we're going to have fiber at every home and every business, starting with 1 gig going up to 10 gig. And that's going to be something that only builds our city, but also brings back full circle that idea of security that you need on your network, because now I have everybody in the city sitting on a fiber network and is able to do more with less.
And that's actually going to be a key theme in the conversation today. I have a good number of questions, but I want it to be pretty free-flowing. Really what everybody who's watching today can expect is we're going to break it down into 3 sections. So want to dive into some of the challenges that were the drivers behind the change to move to zero trust, to move away from VPNs, a couple of the other decisions that you made to do, look at that implementation phase. That's always, the big question of how difficult was it? All right, challenges are going to come up either internally with processing. How do you address those challenges? And then what do you do next? What do you look to in the future? So maybe with that, I can throw, actually, before we dive in, because so far you said a lot of interesting things, the extremes of when you were on the world stage from a bad news perspective to some of the decisions you made to move to Google, which is, I don't talk to a lot of municipalities that are Google shops. What does a typical workday look like for you? What's a snapshot for you? Like, this is kind of extreme so far.
Yeah, and that's extreme also. Again, because like I said, my career grew up here, even though I was teaching on the side and doing those other things, and it's been a pleasure to work here because we always have unique challenges. Because it's like the mayor that I currently work for, he was here for 2 terms, took off 2 terms, now has been back for 2 terms. So he's not in love with technology, but he also understands the need for it within the organization to function. And so we were always giving, tasks and challenges by saying, I need this to be done, but you get this much money, and that would cause us to find many solutions that were low cost, but still secure and effective. So my days are always challenging. They start around 6:45 in the morning. My first set of users come in at 7 because we are a city. So our public works, our parks department, things like that start at 7 in the morning. And then I'm usually heading home around 5 at night because I have people who work until 4:45. And my staff, is here with me, but they don't put in those type of hours because, again, we're conscious of spending money, and that would be overtime, and I'm a salary employee, so it's like you do what you got to do to get the job done. The days are I'm a working IT manager. I answer help desk calls at the same time as build networks. On top of that, dealing with multiple vendors, implementing Google Workspace. We're also doing an initiative for digitizing everything in the building and trying to get rid of paper. I always laugh at people who say, we're going paperless. And I said, no, you're going with less paper. You will never be paperless. Yeah. But, those initiatives are things that keep coming forward on top of keeping your network secure and on top of training your users to help keep your network secure. I think security is a family approach. And when I say family, I mean our workforce as a whole. It's not just the IT director's job to keep a network secure or the building secure or your data secure. It's the family of city workers that are going to keep this secure for us in the long run.
Absolutely. You're only as secure as your weakest link at the end of the day, right? So
absolutely. You can only pour so much water through one pipe, and you can put all the water there you want, but it's got to go through that pipe.
And if there's a hole in the pipe, it doesn't matter, right?
That's right.
So, okay. Well, and so with that, like you touched on a little bit about what your environment looks like. a good mix between legacy, modern systems. You're bringing in, Chromebooks for staff. It's a lot of remote work, remote access. We started talking maybe give or take a year ago, just less than that.
Yep.
What did your environment look like at that point, and what were some of the challenges that were top of mind that you needed to address?
Well, the thing that drove me most is that our water utility is a utility, but it is part of the city. It's not like a lot of other municipalities or cities where your water department is its own standalone utility. And in that sense, there's many, if you want to say, advisories or warnings that you want to keep your water plant secure, because if there was going to be a attack, whether it's, cyber attack or chemicals or something like that, it's going to happen at your water production plant, because if you can pollute the water, you can do a lot of things to a population of 100,000 people. And so with that in mind, one of the things is keeping that water plant secure, and also, most importantly, keeping the SCADA system secure and not accessible to the outside world. So we were investigating that, at the same time having our insurance company saying you gotta be able to meet these requirements. That's going on too, on top of that. So I was reading an article online, and Agilicus came up as the SCADA protector. Let me say this again. VPN access, keeping your SCADA secure, was like what they had put in there. And then below that, they had put zero trust. And I already knew what zero trust was. But in my head, I was like, you cannot be remotely accessing your SCADA network and be keeping it secure, because there is a hole to allow that network VPN into your network. And that's what drove me to, I think I picked up the phone and called you. I can't remember if I sent an email or picked up a phone. And that's what started the discussion. And almost immediately on the first discussion, when I was talking with you and then Nick, your engineer, and found out that your base was kind of Linux based, and the knowledge that was there for security and how you were approaching security, I think there was kind of like this immediate connection from the uniqueness that we do of many things here at the city, and the same way Agilicus was approaching the VPN-less type connection into using zero trust. And it was interesting because we were also looking at some other vendors that are more of a market player of that. And, we had some choices that we could have easily taken at that time for a different vendor to help us get to a zero trust access into our network. And not only did I have to do that for the water utility, but when I was looking at that, I wanted to do it across my network. It wasn't just the water utility. It was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it all the way across. And then when I learned more about you, learned more about your progressiveness with the zero trust type thing, it was a no-brainer for me to continue the conversation and investigate that more.
And first of all, I really appreciate that, because I promise I didn't pay him anything to say that. That was unprompted, but awesome.
It's
because
true. Yeah, I was going to say that was the truth. I'm not really here to promote Agilicus. I'm here to help inform other municipalities of how they can reach that zero trust, because being that we're an open office shop, my philosophy also is open source, and I want to share with everybody how to do something. I'm not one of those type of things like we do this and we're better than you. Let me share the wealth and just really use that open source approach, because that's just the best way to help protect as a whole.
And that's awesome. And so on that note, I want to dive into some of the tactical questions. So you were in this position where you knew that the SCADA system, that's kind of high priority, critical infrastructure. In a perfect world, that's not on the internet, but there's use cases where there's a legitimate reason for somebody who's remote to access into that, to make sure it's safe, to make sure it's operational. And not to mention, the rest of your network with staff working remotely and remotely accessing resources. What were the key factors that you looked at? You mentioned you were looking at some other vendors. You looked at us. What was in your mind of, here's the key factors when I'm going down this road?
Believe it or not, it wasn't cost. The key factors was the sense to be flexible, able to work with us to get to our back-end systems, our legacy systems, without having the hurdles to really jump or find out there's a roadblock, and you just aren't going to be able to do certain things with the zero trust type penetration into your network. And so those, the key factors was we have to do this for reasonable cost, but the most important factor is security and really meeting that zero trust. Because if I can't meet that zero trust, I'm not doing what I need to do for in this case, the insurance companies, which is important, but they also keeping my network secure and still giving my end users ease of access without causing it to be difficult. And I may be jumping ahead here. The other thing that was important to me is that I needed it to be hardware agnostic. I needed it to be able not to be married to a device and being able to be married to my user and go from there. And that was like the approach. The approach was more pure, if you will, than it was, this is the vendors that have been used in the past. These are the vendors you choose, and you're just going down that road. It was more of finding something that was going to be able to be flexible, was going to be able to cost effective, was going to meet the requirements of the insurance company, but at the same time, the most important part is keeping the network secure and ease of use to get into that network.
Yeah, and that makes sense because that ties in a few of the other concepts that you were talking about, making your dollar go farther, making that investment that actually has utility and can reach to other use cases. How did you marry? You're a pretty aspirational guy. You have a lot of you reach high, and from what I've seen, you've achieved everything that you said you wanted to achieve, and you continually grow and set more goals. But how do you marry that type of approach with a leadership structure that doesn't always value IT? You mentioned, a mayor who's not deep into technology. How do you get that stakeholder buy-in?
Well, first I have to put out there, I love our mayor. He just
is
just someone who technology is not what he wants to do. He wants to develop and bring his city, along with him. But it's just that technology isn't where he wants to put his money. That's okay. But getting off that and coming back to, as what you were talking about, marrying that together, we were an open VPN shop. So we used OpenVPN, which, meets the latest and greatest of all security models. But with that, it's a little more difficult to set up. So not everybody is versed in spinning up their own Linux virtual machine, loading down OpenVPN, creating their keys, making sure they're at least 1024, making sure all of those other things happen, then getting that on devices that range from phones to tablets to MacBooks to Windows machines to all of those different types of devices that people are going to be using in your working force to do that. And it worked well. I mean, it was secure, it did what we needed, it did all of those things, but it was also difficult to manage on the back end when you brought in new people and tried to, because it wasn't the flashy, user interface or the flashy, graphical user interface that people are used to or wanting to embrace. And even the end user having to say, okay, you have to do this, and the little box is going to come up, and the things that come along with OpenVPN. I'm sure the audience is aware of that. So with that being used, we were already keeping things secure in many ways, but I would have to have a hole to allow them to get into the secure areas of the SCADA systems and the other type of systems. So you're opening yourself up to some vulnerabilities just because of past practices. With the new practice of zero trust, that it doesn't meet that model. And so I had to look for a solution that met that model.
And that's actually a very good approach, and one that I think a lot of the other municipalities that I work with can learn from. So, yes, security is absolutely top of mind and paramount in a lot of this. But when, the way that I look at water in the taps is how individuals who don't work in IT look at IT. You turn the taps on, water comes out. You turn the taps off, water goes away. And it's hard to see all the infrastructure behind that supports that. And so, what I heard from you is that not only was it about increasing the security, it was about minimizing a human error that could possibly occur, just by happenstance. And it was making the lives better of your users who actually interact with the system on a daily basis.
Yep. I mean, and your point on the slide here, of cybersecurity challenges in municipalities. it's not just municipalities. It's anybody that has a network. Anybody
Yeah,
that has a network that wants to protect their data.
absolutely.
You need to be looking at creative tools. I mean, one of the things that a lot of people support me on and other people laugh at me on is, if you don't use the latest and greatest tool that's out there, and I won't use names, but if I follow the standard of the hardware of what everybody and their brother in corporate America uses, that's what's getting attacked.
Yeah,
That's what people know how to attack, those type of things. So just doing things that are just a little bit off and unique protects you, just
yeah,
because people don't realize what you're protecting with. And in this open conversation, I will not share with you what we run on our edge network or how we approach that. But that one off, and I think Agilicus kind of met that for me. That was kind of like a satisfaction of working with you, and maybe we'll be getting to this later about some of the unique things I needed to have done, and your approach of sitting down and having a conversation with your head engineer, and I can tell that he's home, and we're talking through this as if we're sitting and having a beer to come up with that solution, and it's solid, rock solid. And I find that comforting that you're not in this, corporate setting and here's your checklist of things to go down. You listened to what I needed, you understood what I needed, and we were able to accomplish that.
and that's amazing to hear. Not only from my side of the table, but from the engineering side as well. It's great to work with organizations like yourself, but then it's also great to hear that once you do come on board, once you start to dive in with the rest of the team, that if anything, your opinion gets better after dealing with me and then moving to them. Right? It just goes up from there.
Well, that's because engineering and I got to pick on you together. So
Yeah, exactly. So, but it is a good transition in terms of, if we dive in and we actually go a little bit deeper into what you just said, from an implementation perspective, what were the things that you needed? What were some of the things that you thought would be hurdles that weren't hurdles? What did we run into? What can other municipalities expect if they go down this road of zero trust?
So the first thing that we have is that we have legacy systems that have been with the city for 30 years. We own all of our own code that really runs an ERP system that was an ERP system before the acronym even existed. And so I needed to be able to have my end users be able to access that type of technology, as people call it, the green screen. Still need them accessing that, even though we're going through a study to replace that. And at the same time, we still needed to get into the SCADA network and allow us to run, in our case, we run Ignition from, well, I won't even bring up the vendor, but we're running Ignition for the SCADA system instead of running the latest and greatest that a lot of other places run. And that has some unique challenges. I don't want to say challenges. It has some unique requirements that are necessary to access that SCADA system from the outside, and even taking it a step further to allow the engineers, if they had to work from home, be able to continue to design and work within that. And so the idea that you already had knowledge of Ignition and was able to talk through those types of things, that we were able to quickly throw in the Agilicus solution and have them accessing the Ignition system on laptops and desktops that were secured with running a version of a Linux operating system. And because of yours being a web portal and being hardware agnostic and also being operating system agnostic, that allowed us to set it up quickly. And then being, like we talked about, a Google shop, that we're moving to be a Google shop, we're not completely there. Being able to use Google Single Sign-On to go through that portal to get the users to where they needed to do was like one less layer that I had to add on top of that. So we weren't having to add users into the product separately. We weren't having to add passwords into the product separately. We were just having to add, as we call it, the conditions that allow them to access single resources and not the whole network. And John, that was very important because OpenVPN brings you into the network. I mean, there are things you can do to bring it down and things you can do internally to narrow it down and make it more secure. But the idea usually is you get into the network and it's as if you're sitting at your desk. Yeah. With Agilicus, I was able to fine tooth that down and say, this user gets to this device to do these things. And my civic organization, the insurance company, when I was explaining what we were doing, is like, that is meeting the criteria we need to do with compliance. And, we won't even go down that road about compliance and what you got to do for compliance and things like that. But Agilicus met those compliances. And I mean, I don't sleep at night sometimes thinking about, oh my gosh, this could happen and someone could get into the network, or we're under attack and that could get into the network, or we just found out that there was a municipality not that far from us. We're a city, there's a county that had someone get into their network with ransomware and bring down their mail server for 4 days. And they're a shop that spends millions and has lots of people. And I'm thinking, that's going to happen to us tomorrow. And going through this with Agilicus really did, I know this sounds like a sales pitch, but it's not. It really did give me some peace of mind of being able to say, you know what, it's more difficult now than it was before. We've made it more secure than we possibly, could. And many people may agree with me or disagree with me on this one, but it's like, you're as secure as your weakest link that you brought up, but you're also never truly completely secure. There's always that one user that shares his password. There's always that one user that takes and tapes it on the bottom of their keyboard, or that one user that uses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though nowadays you can make it so they can't do those types of things, but there's still things that users are very creative on to make their life easier, not purposely realizing they're also causing a threat to the network.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's human nature in a lot of instances. Have I reused a password in my life? Absolutely, because it gets hard to remember all the passwords. I'm going to be honest with you, right? I know it's best practice, but it's difficult from a practice perspective. And so, one of our methodologies, and one that I think aligned with your methodology quite well from the start, there's actually two of them that come top of mind. One is the defense in depth. So that was something that you were already implementing. I couldn't tell you for how long. I'm sure years. From the beginning. What happens at every single layer within my network? If the first layer is breached, do we have protections in the next layer? A methodology that aligns with us very well. And then the next one was, in a perfect world, there are no usernames and passwords. So how do we boil that down to one so that the burden is not on the user to change their password every so often, to have different passwords for everything they interact with? It's the single sign-on that you mentioned. They have one email and password, and we leverage that across all the use cases.
Right. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here to say what we're doing is, the ultimate solution. What we're doing is a solution that best fits our organization with our budget. And there's other organizations that have a larger budget that can do, more things and concentrate and throw money in other areas of the bucket. And, for us, most municipalities across the country are feeling the squeeze of less federal dollars, less state dollars. You can only raise your taxes so much before it starts, putting a burden on your constituents. So even though security is always at the front of the line, there's times, and if nobody admits this, they're not being truthful, that, security doesn't always get the first set of money. Other things get the first set of money, but you got to do your best and come up with solutions that are best fitting for your organization. So I want to make sure that, everyone listening or tapping in on here understands that I'm talking about what's best for our organization and fits our unique situation of how we approach things. Other people may have a better solution in how they approach things, and we're not knocking that or saying you have to do these types of things. What we are saying is zero trust is real. Zero trust is doable today for a reasonable amount of money, and being comfortable to meet those compliances that are required by our insurance companies, because really that's what's driving a lot of it, is you can't get insured if somebody breaks into your network. And that's a big thing, and I think that's what's pushing a lot of things, or a lot of people to look at things, because their insurance companies are making you fill out these questionnaires now saying, do you meet this, 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 and this? But that shouldn't be what's pushing it. What's really pushing it is keeping your data safe and keeping things like a SCADA system safe.
Exactly. And I think, where everyone is at right now, and, you're absolutely correct in that organizations are at different stages, organizations have different budgets. I think the commonality is there has not been a single person I talked to that said, my cyber budget this year is way too big. I don't know how to spend it. It's it's one of those where it is always okay, we only have this much and we really got to make it last this year. So I think that is something that anybody can relate to.
You prioritize. You take that budget and you prioritize. This is our security budget. What do we need to fix and protect the most?
Exactly. And then the other aspect is legacy systems. Everyone across the board, every organization, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, unless you're a startup that was just, created 3 weeks ago, everybody has legacy systems, and that's what they're really worried about protecting, right? It's systems that, in some cases with water, wastewater, SCADA systems, they were never meant to be connected to the internet in the first place.
Correct. Absolutely. And that's important to say, because municipalities, and believe it or not, banks have the most legacy systems out there in the industry for IT. The banking industry is running COBOL on their back end and throwing those green screens into a beautiful graphical interface on a PC. But in the end, number crunching is the same number crunching we did in 1970s that we're doing today in 2023. And in a way that kind of scares me because my money's in that bank, but at the same time, it's reality. And that's what you have to deal with.
It is. And that's why, so I think that's why when you mentioned that, we're seeing a push from organizations to better themselves from security, but at the same time, we're seeing the same push from insurance companies, and everybody's seeing that push. They're aligning, quite well in the sense that insurance organizations aren't a charity at the end of the day. They want to de-risk their own portfolio, and to do so, they're recommending the best practices, which, it's never good to use the stick to move people along. The carrot's always better, but at the end of the day, they are pushing these organizations in the right direction, I think, right now.
And they have to. I mean, because when you look at the ransomware, which is the big thing, when they come in and they bring organizations to their knees and all it's about is money. And, I find it very interesting that there are parts of legal firms and that specialize in negotiating with ransomware and being, putting your logic in order. I'm the other way. It was just like, why are we putting things into a legal organization on how to deal with this? Why don't we look about how to stop this? And like I said, I know stopping it is a high bar to try to reach, but we certainly can put an effort towards that. And zero trust is that effort.
And so actually, I think that's a good point. And one I'm going to flip this slide to and more of a forward-looking aspect to it, because you highlighted something that at least we talk about internally all the time. I talk about with clients I work with all the time. It's proactive versus reactive mechanisms. It's, you absolutely need antivirus. You absolutely, should have endpoint protection and stuff to understand when things get in your network, but it shouldn't always be reactive. There should be some proactive aspects to it as well.
Correct.
Yeah. And so maybe on that specific note, the proactive is hard to measure because it's not, a machine on a factory floor that, okay, we're going to upgrade that machine and all of a sudden it's going to spit out 2 times the output. How do you measure, even just personal question, how do you measure success when it comes to these type of proactive initiatives?
Well, that can be measured in many different ways. First, obviously, if I'm meeting the criteria and the things that are put out to me by my administration. So, I'm meeting their needs. At the same time, that gives you one, satisfaction, and two, it keeps you in your job because you're doing what is necessary. The other side is protecting because that's something you need to do. So that also is self-satisfying, seeing that you've accomplished a goal, stayed within budget, and it wasn't something like you said that was reactive, it was proactive. That's also success. And all ease of use for the end user. So we go all 3 things, bring this back to circle. You satisfy administration, you satisfy your end users, you're satisfying the insurance company, and if you're not a municipality, your investors, and then in the end, you're satisfying the things that you have driven to do. So you're satisfying yourself. So all of those things are going to bring you to what's success. And success is defined differently for every project and every person. But as a broad, I would say that would be kind of how I kind of measure that success. And not having a break-in in this situation, is success. Or even the end user having difficulty because they didn't follow a rule is success because it was blocked. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you can measure it any way you want, but in a broad 70,000 foot level, I would say that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I buy home insurance, but at the same time, I still lock my door at the end of the day, right? I just don't.
So that's funny you say that, because I was trying to explain, a little bit on the Google part, if I may, just for a little bit, is that people are asking, how are my files secure in Google? Because there isn't this type of thing that I had in this world, there isn't a way, to do this that we did before. And Google's philosophy, obviously, they're an ecosystem that's all about collaboration. And their key is, if you give your user ID and password to someone, you've now made this insecure. So we take that a step farther and say, if you got a safe in your house and you have stashed in there your 401ks, millions of dollars, and you happen to give the key to your neighbor and you're surprised when half of your money's gone, whose fault is it?
And he's got a new car next door.
Yeah, he's got the new car next door, and he retired. Yeah. But you gave the key away. So it's only secure as what you're willing to keep secure.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point, right? And it goes back to, you're only as secure as your weakest link. You have to make sure that all your employees are, up to speed on best practices. That is, full circle, right?
Yep. I mean, we have something in place that is built into our endpoint. All of our email is filtered before it comes into our network. Well, now before it was into Google, but before that, just within the last year, any email that came into our network had already gone through a pre-filter. And that pre-filter company, and again, I won't use names, would put out fake emails every now and then. Or the attachment would say, do you think this attachment is safe? And so the end user can say yes or no. And if they say no, they come back and say, well, you were wrong, this one is safe. Or they would say yes, and they say, good job, this one was a thing. And it was just ongoing teaching the user, and that's something that I had to manually do or hire someone to be sending these types of mails and that type of thing. And so it's just keeping those end users aware of those things happening, instead of just having seminars and emails and things like that, once a year to kind of do it. Just putting it out in front of their face often just kind of keeps them a better end user, if you will.
And I think that's a good point, because it even overlaps into aspects of where we work, right? Because a lot of the conversations that we have, it's about balancing access and security, because for the most part, we're dealing with a large audience who, isn't 10 out of 10 on the technical scale, right? So when it comes to security, typically that means complexity. But I think one of the things that, hopefully we realized in our engagement is that increasing security does not have to increase complexity for the end user.
Well, for us, even though we're using OpenVPN, it actually is less complex when we went with Zero Trust, and I'm taking even a step further. So not only are we securing our SCADA system from outside world by using Agilicus and having, your container that we only point to, and all the details of that. I don't know. We don't really want to discuss that here, but now I'm also taking that to the step that if you aren't in that building, you do not get to the SCADA network unless you're going through Agilicus Zero Trust. So even within our organization, if you aren't physically in that building, you do not get access to that SCADA system. And we had people balking at that. We had, because our buildings, there's 13 buildings in the city of Kenosha, but the water utility really consists of 4. Mainly 3. The 4th is just that they're in and out of City Hall. And with that, they were used to the idea of being able to get to the network because they were in the locked doors of the water administration building. And the water production building's down on the water plant, is I believe like 12 miles away. And they were giving me shit, as in saying, what do you mean I have to go through this to get to that? Well, you're not in the building, and we want to secure that SCADA network. So if you're not in the building, you're not getting to it unless you're going through a zero trust tunnel one way or another. And my end users weren't really happy with me, but in the end, when you explain to them why, that penetration and getting into that network from the outside, well, really you're in the outside being in another building. Even though the buildings are connected via a fiber circuit, you're still in another building.
And at the end of the day, it's about containing that blast radius. Like the defense in depth strategy, if something were to go wrong and get through every layer of your defense, you don't want that to then spread to another building, another server. You want to maintain that kind of least
containment.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so in this case, something gets into the thing. That's one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the Agilicus tunnel, because even though they can't get through it, it's the only hole.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. And so, in our platform, there's things built in from identity to authentication, authorization, reverse proxies. There's all kinds of stuff to make sure that it's an outbound only connection, nothing can get inbound. But from your perspective, it's a single point that you have to visit, and you can make sure that you contain things, and there's audit logs in case you have questions of, okay, where did it go?
Yeah, I mean, the logging in there just came in handy many times when we were trying to build that solution to figure out why we couldn't get something to work that was unique for us on the Agilicus side. And again, I'll use Ignition, and then with Ignition, their design tool. And having it so their design tool can still function on certain user IDs. Again, it's hardware agnostic, it's married to the user, so they can go from device to device. And we don't have to put keys on physical devices, so that, our joke is that the people take their laptop home, and that little 7th and 8th grader who is brilliant, is sitting down and all of a sudden jumps in and has got your open VPN open and he's in the network. With this, it is totally related to the user. And there's no keys out there that are loaded on devices that allow someone to get it into the wrong hands, or, the story that someone was working in a hotel and they left their laptop on and went downstairs, and the cleaning people came in and sent all these erroneous emails because the open VPN was running and the end user didn't follow protocol, only because, they were busy. They were just running downstairs to get a soda and coming back up, and it happens. In this case, that's not going to happen, when you're not married to that device, type thing. So, anyway, I'll leave that one alone.
Those are excellent points, and that's exactly what it is. It's just about, at the end of the day, it's just about minimizing human error. All of us are the weak links at the end of the day. It's just depends on the day who's going to be the weak link. So if you can minimize the opportunities for things to go wrong, you're going to be better overall.
Right. And like we said, zero trust is not an Agilicus product. Zero trust is a philosophy, and also at the same time, the methodology of how to keep your network safe. Agilicus just happens to be the vendor I chose to use because of the familiarity and their focus on SCADA, and then finding out that idea of keeping my SCADA network can be used everywhere, and I've gotten rid of all of our OpenVPN connections. We don't use OpenVPN at all. We are pure zero trust now across the business network, across the SCADA networks, across all of that. And I do sleep better at night knowing that, because I'm not worrying about penetration happening on a device that really comes in and sits on the network, where a device that just allows you to get to one device, one PC, one application, or many, those types of things. You choose that in your design, but it's still more controlled, and being able to do that is something that I didn't realize was as important as it was until I was really digging into it. It was kind of like the light went off type thing when you were trying to achieve, getting down the road. It's kind of like building your house. As you're building the house, and all of a sudden you look over and say, the closet really needs to be over there, and it needs to be a little bigger. But I didn't think of doing it that way. If I flipped this room around, I achieved that. But I wouldn't have realized that if I wasn't there building that room. And building the Agilicus connection with my zero trust brought in many possibilities I really didn't realize were going to be there. And talking with you and Nick, just talking through this scenario in a casual manner of like, well, we're thinking about doing this. What about that? And saying, well, we can do this and we can do that. And the next thing we know, we have a secure connection to something I didn't think I'd have a secure connection to.
And that is awesome to not only be a part of over the last little while, but to hear from you and the takeaway. And so I want to probably ask two more things, and then I want to circle back to, I have a bunch of questions in the public chat and some private ones as well that I want to circle to before we run out of time, but maybe I'll loop these two together. So based on exactly what you just said, looking back, what advice would you have for others going down this zero trust road, and what are some lessons learned?
Well, definitely know what it is you want to protect. So, when you come into the picture, knowing that these are the things I want to achieve and these are the things I want to protect. Because once you get there, you're going to find out a lot more things that you're going to want to do. So have that, as we call it, that cushion room, because it's not really set in stone once you get there, especially for municipalities, because most of us are understaffed and most of us are underfunded. But then all of a sudden the light goes off, I can do this, 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 and this type thing. So I would say be prepared to expand upon your initial idea is one of the things we learned. The second thing I learned is, and this may sound weird because, again, Agilicus is not paying me. We have accomplished everything that I brought up. Being able to say, if you think you're coming in this thing, you're not going to be able to do this. Sitting and talking with Agilicus Engineering saying, well, we want to do this. And Nick, was the gentleman I'm dealing with, says, oh, I think we can do that. You know what? Let me work on that overnight. And then the next day we get a solution. If I would have went to one of those bigger vendors, that this is their, as we call it, this is their cake mix, and this is all you get. And I wouldn't have had those solutions corrected for me or provided for me or being creative and coming up with another way to do it. I would have had to follow the template. Being that Agilicus is a smaller company that allowed me to have more of a personal type connection with them and talk through those things, I found to be very important and at the same time refreshing, because I never expected in this one case, Nick and I were working on something that we needed. Okay, now we got some GIS stuff that needs to be done and the end user wants to be able to do this and attach it to Arc Online and do this and this and this. And I have no idea how we're going to do that if I don't open it up like OpenVPN. And Nick's like, well, actually, we got a plugin that deals with Arc Online. And the next day we're sitting down with the mapper and saying, well, try this, try this, try this. And it's like, great. I really didn't think we were going to get there. I thought we hit a roadblock where, sorry, you're going to have to be in the building to do that. And Nick had that solution.
And that's amazing to hear, just because, one of our philosophies from a corporate perspective is that all of our customers are unique. All of our customers are unique. They've made a series of investments, years leading up to working with us. And what our goal is to take our technology, our security platform, and have them use our platform to leverage their past investments. So we don't want you to say, okay, well, that doesn't fit our mold, so you're going to have to go out and find a new solution for that. We want to say, all right, we've either worked with it in the past and it works right away, or if it doesn't, let's make it happen for you and let's get that up and running.
Well,
so that's awesome.
From my perspective, I enjoyed challenging you because it was
Nick, you enjoy challenging Nick.
Well, Agilicus in a sense is just like, you know what, I'm going to throw this at him, and being we're both open source Linux minded guys. Nick, the engineer, I'm like, he's not going to get to do this, and Nick just smiles and says, I got to think about it. And in this one case, we had somebody remote that didn't plan on being remote, and they had a device, and normally we would have had to get a key to them and put in the security key and the encryption and all this other stuff. I said to him, open up Chrome, give me 15 minutes. Do you have a Google login? Here's, yes, blah, blah, and off we go, and we're connected in that hour, and that person that was stuck somewhere was able to get in remotely to do some things that were crucial to that person's day. So that right there, I find satisfaction in, and I also define success, because we did that in that short period of time. The other thing with it being a web portal and things like that is vendors. So before, I really struggled when a vendor came to me and says, my biggest thing is HVAC or dealing with our our SCADA system is, our vendors are worldwide. They're coming out of Germany. They're coming out of, Japan. They're coming out of these other things that they do to get into the SCADA systems, because SCADA systems are worldwide. Everybody produces water. And being able to now say, all right, I'm going to have to ship you this key and doing all that other stuff, to basically saying, do you have a Google ID? Do you got a Microsoft ID? Do you got this? And if they say no to all of those, all right, I'm going to create you an ID. And then the sweet spot on all of this is I throw in second factor authentication. You want to talk about feeling secure? Now I have remote access, second factor authentication on top of zero trust that I'm able to implement to my vendor to let him support the equipment within my network, and I can fine tune him down, or her, or organization, however you want to apply to it, to a specific device within that SCADA network, saying this is what you get access to because this is what you got to work on, and not worry that they see the whole network. That to me is kind of like something I never dreamt of, being that I've done this for so long, sitting down and saying, I'm going to be able to do this through a web portal. I'm going to be able to do this and tie them to a single device, and I'm not going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars to make that happen.
Yeah, and you put it almost better than I could even put it, in terms of zero trust.
I'm in Canada and I'm getting a beer out of you.
Hey, you know what? It's on me. We can have a couple. But absolutely, zero trust is a philosophy, and zero trust is not our product, but it's a fantastic philosophy that we built a product around. And the way that we built it, we looked at end to end. What do you need? Do you need multi-factor authentication? Do you need to manage those privileged users? How do you provide them access? And our goal is to bundle that up into a deployable platform that, exactly as you said, in an hour, you're up and running.
The thing I did do wrong, and I'm going to put a little bit on you too, is that we probably weren't educated about the ability to group and the ability to make things simpler.
Yeah.
Even though it's not hard, but to simplify things within the Agilicus platform. So when we were first starting, we were adding users because we didn't have the Google connection in there just yet. We were adding the user, we were taking the user, we were taking the resource, then we're taking the resource and we're adding the permission, and then we're taking that permission module and connecting it to a user. And then as we got farther down the road, and I was talking with Nick, and then I was talking with Michael, your support that I usually end up with. There's many of them out there, but I purposely know Michael's schedule now, and I try to ask during that time. It's like all of a sudden they start educating me a little bit more about, you probably should be doing that within a resource group, and then have a permission group, and then within that group, just assign that person once you put them into that group. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is basic. This is basic Active Directory, basic LDAP, basic anything, that way. But I'm not tying it to my Active Directory. I'm not creating another link. I'm not creating another hole into that type of thing. I'm doing it through other things. So I really wish I would have understood the simplicity of your product when it comes to grouping things and tying things together. So for those people that are seriously considering talking to Agilicus more, just be aware that there's simpler ways to do things when you first get the idea, and just continually to create groups. Everything should be done in a group, in my opinion, now, with Agilicus. Even though if you got a single user, a single vendor, you still create that group, because as vendors, employees come and go. I just put the employee in and out, and I'm not worrying about recreating that resource. So I would say that was, right now, I would say that is my biggest faux pas of coming into there. But I'm sure people looking from the outside would find many more that I'm just not seeing right now.
And that makes total sense. And that's something that actually we would probably agree with. I would agree with, in the sense that, when we first started, we were looking almost at use cases in isolation. And I think it wasn't until after we merged together, your RDP water use case and ignition and all this kind of stuff, that we started to go at it holistically. And I think that's when you revamped it a little bit.
Yeah. Good word, holistic. Approach it holistically.
Yeah, that's a good approach for sure. We are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to sneak in some questions. I have, I'm going to shoot one almost a little unrelated to the topic at hand, but Jeffrey was curious, when you're moving people to the G Suite world, are you still buying Office Excel, PowerPoint, that sort of thing? Or are you moving people onto those Google tools as well?
Well, I gotta answer that in two parts. Being that we're an open source shop, believe it or not, we use what the core of OpenOffice is called LibreOffice. So many of our users were coming from a virtualized desktop with a Linux background doing that. But we do have our proprietary Active Directory with all of those things. Google has a beautiful feature called Office Compatibility and allows you to keep it in that Office format of .docx, .xlsx, and those types of things, and you're able to exchange and share files, continuing to have that Office compatibility. So it's our goal that we will not ever buy another Microsoft license for Office down the road. Yeah. Immediately, with our first being that we're just implementing this, we're going to probably have to do it for our next refresh. But after that, we're hoping that we'll never have to buy another Office package again, because Google's talking Office, if you will, through their Office compatibility. But great question.
Yeah, it actually was. I was curious myself, to be honest. One that was sent privately to me was, are you planning to extend...
the camera.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, please. Are you planning to extend Zero Trust to citizen-facing services?
At this time, no. Only because we're also going through a study to replace our legacy systems. And our legacy systems are all going to be web-based, hardware agnostic, and in the cloud. So those vendors, so we're going to have a system integrator. We're actually putting out RFPs for system integrators to bring their, if you will, pool of vendors into the mix and show us how they can keep all of our continuity between our legacy systems all talk to each other right now. And we don't want that broken. And so when we're going out and we're doing this study, we're going to be getting many vendors with many packages that best fit each need, being able to keep in that continuity. So I would believe that the vendor that we choose with the SaaS package is going to allow the constituent to have access to inside type information through them and not through us. But that being said, I have 17 aldermen who are really outside constituents. They aren't employees of the city, because the City of Kenosha, they aren't employed. This is not their job. They do that as, you know, their contribution to the community, and they're working on the outside. You know, they could be kind of considered a constituent or a citizen, having access to some things into the network through the Open VPN, through the Zero Trust network. But it's not currently something we have on our plan. Okay, interesting. And then, just for the sake of time, I might reach out to a few of these questions afterwards if I didn't ask you. If you need to keep going, John, just to let you know.
Okay, well, I might go a few more minutes. One of the things that I personally wanted to ask you, because, I mean, I know you have been not only with the city, but within the city for forever, it seems. But when you eventually have to pass the torch, what are the accomplishments that you want to leave as your legacy at the city?
Well, I'm one that's kind of private. Like I already talked about, my name, I don't put my name out there. We don't have a web presence for IT, that type of things. But what I want to be able to leave the city with is a efficient, secure network that can grow, and also systems as a whole, and also making sure that my staff is able to continue on, and that I've shared with them everything they need to do to keep it going. So my legacy would be that, you know, when I walk out the door, nobody notices. That would be my legacy.
Oh, come on, please. Everybody would notice.
If you can walk out the door and everything keeps running and they don't need you, you have been a successful leader and a successful manager.
You know what? It's funny you mentioned that, because in one of our initial conversations, you know, thinking back again almost a year ago, there's one thing that you said that stuck out to me at the time. And what you said was that you were talking about all of the security that you have implemented into the network thus far, which was actually very impressive in terms of what you did and what you managed. And you said that you want to make sure whoever steps up and takes this over, it's easy for them to manage. And I think that was one of the things that stood out to me the most, because you did a very impressive job with everything that you had built within the city, what you oversaw, but you also said, it's a lot to manage, and I want to make sure that the next person has an easier job than I did, which I thought was it was a strong leadership quality of yours that I admired when I heard that.
Well, so thank you. But I mean, it's really part of my philosophy is that I want things, leave things better than when I came,
Yeah.
but throwing that in here that I've been here 34 years and we went from, no internet to dial-up internet to 10 gig fiber full symmetric, it's not that I can leave it better than when I found it. That just happened because of technology.
Hey, sometimes that does happen. And so I'm going to ask one more question then on that note. I'll go to this slide in the sense that just for the people who are still on here, if you're interested in learning a little bit more, we're more than happy to demo the platform. We're more than happy to help you with the trial. Feel free to reach out to myself. We have some direct emails down below. Go to our website. But Tig, so I mean, you were just talking about where the municipality started with when you came on board and where everything was from a technology perspective. Let's talk 2030 vision. 7 years from now, what do you see?
I'm retired.
Yeah, you see a beach is what you see. Is it, it's a water on the horizon, the sun setting, that's it, eh?
You asked.
Hey.
Well, because of the city's fiber initiative, and the interconnectivity, zero trust, I mean, people who say that they're putting out a 10-year plan in IT, I've always laughed at, because IT changes so quickly, and people don't understand that cell phones are still in their infancy of where they're going to be. I mean, and I'm coming from, there was no cell phones when I started doing this, and that type of stuff. To say, what do I expect to see in 7 years? I really can't tell you what I expect to see in 7 years. I mean, just with the introduction of AI, and I know that scares a lot of people, but at the same time, a true managed AI, managing your container, managing your data, I don't think I can tell you where things are going to be in 7 years. But what I can tell you is that the city will probably still be embracing open source. The city will be interconnected with fiber that is 10 gig or more, because it isn't fiber that limits you, it's the hardware that you put on there. And zero trust is just going to be something that is expected to happen, period. It's just going to be built into things, and you won't even be thinking about it. It will just be expected to happen there.
Yeah,
those are long-term, very broad type statements.
And you'll be reading the council notes from the lawn chair on the beach and get all the updates.
I'll be down in Costa Rica if my 401k hangs in there.
Hey, yeah, make sure you invite me. I'd love to join you. Tig, on that note, I want to thank you for jumping on this webinar today. I know we really appreciate working with you. We're glad that you picked Agilicus as a solution to move towards zero trust on, and hopefully we continue to work together for a long time. And then when you go on the beach, that I get an invite or two.
The feeling's mutual, but I'll add one more thing before we go. My staff. So doing all that work and getting everything in place, that the work was mainly between myself and you and Nicholas. When it came to bring my staff on board of how to add someone and do that, I hit my main guy that's been with me the longest and sat him down and said, this is what you got to do. And literally a conversation that was 15 minutes long, he's out there adding users, adding resources, adding connectivity, and we limit who can access what, so not everybody in the department's allowed to add people. We control that, and that's part of our security thing, is who's allowed to add people to get remote access, and it's got to be approved. And the simplicity, be able to show him that, compared to when I had to sit him down and teach him OpenVPN, went from a couple hours discussion, if not more, over time, to a 15-minute discussion, and then him getting exciting, saying, "Oh, did you know you can do this?" So it goes the other way. Also, it's just, passing it on to the staff was simple.
And that is fantastic to hear, because at the end of the day, the message we want to get across is security does not have to equal complexity. And that's from a management perspective, from a user perspective, from a deployment perspective. And so hearing that directly from you, who have evaluated solutions, have chosen us, have deployed with us, have rolled out with us, I mean, it's great to hear that throughout. So I appreciate that.
John, and again, I'm saying you have not prompted me. We have not had pre-discussions, things like that. You know, one of the things you talked about is looking back. This is probably the easiest solution I've implemented in 34 years.
Come on.
I'm serious. It was probably the easiest solution I implemented when it came to something so important and so vast.
That is fantastic to hear.
Access. So, I mean, that's just my opinion.
And it means a lot, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of noise out there. The space of cybersecurity, it's huge. Again, budgets are tiny. Where do we invest this dollar versus that dollar? And to have your opinion that highly of us, like you're talking incredibly highly about us, and we truly appreciate it, because we hope that the actions speak louder than any sales material that we can put out there. And you know, I think you're a good reflection of that.
Well, thank you, and everybody listening. It's worth a discussion. Not saying it's the best solution for you, but it's worth a discussion.
Tig, I appreciate that, and I guess beer's on me if you ever make it up into my neck of the woods.
Well, now you're going to come down to Costa Rica, remember? But it was my pleasure.
Twist my arm. Today, I'll be waiting.
Yeah, I said I hope today we did help some people and give them you know, something to think about, or answered some of their questions, because that was the goal of doing this, is reaching out and helping others that are invested into IT.
I really, really do appreciate that, and I appreciate your time. And I'm sure you and I will talk again very soon.
All right, you have a good afternoon.
All right, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.